Magandang araw po sa inyo. Welcome po sa isa na namang episode ng online series ni Inang Pamantasan, kung saan ang pagkatuto ay walang hangganan. Ito ang PNU Talks. Ako nga pala si Teacher Kevin at ako ang inyong Learning from Home buddy sa episode na ito. Today, we are going to talk about the students' reading attitudes across different literacy purposes and mediums. In this episode, we're going to answer three questions. Question number one is, what is reading attitude? Number two, why should we talk about reading attitude? Or why should we investigate about reading attitude? And finally, number three is, how should we investigate reading attitudes? Reading attitude falls under the affective domain of reading, which includes motivation, attention, interest, and efficacy. It is fundamentally pertaining to the feeling, disposition, or inclination of the students towards reading and towards different reading activities. The definition may also include reading beliefs, reading perception, and even judgment. The feeling may be inclined to positive or negative beliefs and perceptions about reading. Why should we investigate the students' reading attitudes? It is a fundamental aspect of literacy development. What makes it fundamental is that it is deemed as a crucial factor affecting the student's decision to read. For decades, literacy scholars have already established the relationship of reading attitudes with different reading domains, such as reading engagement, reading proficiency, and reading achievement, which are all essential in the academe. The basic idea is that those who have positive reading attitudes have good reading engagement, good reading proficiency, and high reading achievement. This resonates with the Matthew effect concept in reading, in which it is perceived and observed that those students who like reading read more. And this reading frequency allows them more time to hone their reading abilities. And ultimately, this will translate to reading achievement. Through the years, the concept of reading attitude has evolved, and what I am presenting to you now is a 21st century conceptualization of reading attitudes by Conradi, Jang, Bryant, Kraft, and McKenna. They take into account the multidimensionality of literacy. And multidimensionality of literacy entails the understanding and recognition of the reader's context. Reader's context in terms of their reading purposes and in terms of the mediums that they use for reading. I have created this simple diagram for the purpose of the better presentation of Conradi et al.'s conceptualization of reading attitudes. Instead of looking into the attitudes of the students towards reading in general, what's happening in the surveying of reading attitudes is we look into the attitudes of the students towards different reading purposes. And the two main classifications of reading purposes are academic reading and recreational reading. We also need to look into the attitudes of the students towards the different mediums that they use for reading. And this is print text or print materials and digital text or digital materials. Now, this diagram by Conradi et al. Speaks of the different literacy activities. And we see that these literacy activities are classified into four. We also see that these literacy activities are in accordance with different reading purposes and different reading mediums. More importantly, we see how these purposes and mediums are intertwined. And so these results to the four dimensions of literacy activities. We have the academic reading of print text, or AP. We also have academic reading of digital text, or AD. Next is the recreational reading of print text, or RP, and the recreational reading of digital text, or RD. Let us see. Using print reference materials. Print reference materials like dictionary, almanac, encyclopedia, and the like. And this is for school requirement purposes. Next, we have for AD, see that? Reading to do web-based research. Okay, this is for school research, and we use the internet to be able to carry out that research work. Okay, next, RP. So we have reading a self-selected paperback. Recreational reading, aside from it is done in our free time, we also have the liberty to select the reading material. And then finally, we have the RD, reading Facebook posts. Okay, social media, that is digital. And we do this to enjoy for leisurely purposes. At this point, we've already answered the what and the why questions about reading attitudes. Now let us answer the how question, and that is, how do we actually investigate the reading attitudes of the students? We do that by measuring their reading attitudes, and this entails quantitative methods. We are using survey questionnaires. There are several survey questionnaires, and you can even make your own survey questionnaires to measure the reading attitudes of the students. If you know already the principles, if you know already the framework of reading attitudes, encompassing the different literacy activities, the multidimensional literacy activities, then you're good to go. You can already create your own reading attitude survey. However, what I am presenting to you now are the two classic survey instruments for reading attitude studies. Okay, these are the tried and tested ones. These are validated and their reliability is proven. Several research studies have instrumentalized these survey questionnaires. I am talking about the ERAS, or the Elementary Reading Attitude Survey by McKenna and Keir in 1990, and the SARA, or the Survey of Adolescent Reading Attitudes by Conradi et al., which was designed in 2013. Let us focus our attention on ERAS, or the Elementary Reading Attitude Survey. From the name itself, it is a survey instrument that you can use, or you should use, when you measure, when you intend to gauge the reading attitudes of elementary students. So these are the students from grades 1 to 5, or probably students from grades 1 to 6. These are categorized as young learners or young readers. Let's look at the directions. Please circle the picture that describes how you feel when you read a book. Okay, so we see their feeling through these icons. So we see uh, a very happy Garfield, a mildly smiling Garfield, a mildly upset Garfield, and a very upset Garfield. Okay, so really appropriate for young learners. Of course, when we adapt eras, we can use other icons. We can even localize this. Okay, we can even use the emojis, which is of their digital language. Okay, very appropriate for our 21st century and digital native learners. By the way, this version that I am showing is also an adaptation because in the original version of Eras, it's making use of word descriptions for the options to represent their feeling. All right. Another thing that we should notice is this one highlights the print reading material. All right, let's look at the questions now. Number one, how do you feel when you read a book on a rainy Saturday? This is reading for recreational purpose. Number two, how do you feel when you read a book in school during free time? Okay, at first, we may think, oh, this is for academic purpose because of the phrase in school, but actually, it is still for recreational purpose. So here we must be reminded that recreational reading happens not only at home, not only in places outside the school, it may also happen in school, it may also happen in different places. Okay, as long as our purpose is to enjoy, to have leisure, okay? And we're doing it during our free time. We're doing it during our convenient time, okay? And we're not doing it for school purposes. So that is recreational reading. And we inquire about the attitudes or the feelings of the young learners about recreational reading of print text through these questions. To continue, let us look at the other questions. How do you feel when a teacher asks you questions about what you read? So obviously, this is for academic purpose. Next, how do you feel about reading workbook pages and worksheets? Apparently, this is academic reading. And these sample questions are also inquiring about the elementary students' feelings towards academic reading of print materials. This time, let us expound on the SARA, or the Survey of Adolescent Reading Attitudes. As the name suggests, this is optimal for adolescent learners. They are the students in the high school level. But we may also consider grade 6 students because they are transitioning from early literacy to adolescent literacy. You notice that this was recently designed noong 2013 lang, di ba? So this is a 21st century tool. This already encompasses new literacies. To be more particular, digital literacy. Okay, and what you see here is my own adaptation of Sarah. I've used this when I conducted a study to survey the reading attitudes of my senior high school students. So what did I do? I provided Filipino translation for the questions and for the options which represent their feelings, okay, towards the different literacy activities. Let's focus on this sample question. Ano ang damdamin mo sa pagbabasa ng dyaryo o magazine para sa isang aralin? What is the purpose of reading? Obviously, it is for academic purpose. So this is academic reading of print text, okay, the newspapers and magazines. Another sample question. Ano ang damdamin mo sa pagbabasa ng electronic book o e-book para sa isang aralin? Purpose-wise, this is still academic. Okay, and then this is academic reading of digital material. Another question, ano ang damdamin mo sa pagbabasa ng kahit anong nakaprint, libro man yan, magazine, comics at iba pa, sa libre mong oras? Purpose-wise, this is recreational reading. Recreational reading of what medium? This is recreational reading of print text or material. Last sample question. Ano ang damdamin mo sa pagbabasa ng posts sa social media tulad ng Facebook o Twitter sa libre mong oras? Apparently, this is recreational reading. Of what material? Of digital material or digital text, which is what we read in social media. Let us go back to the why of reading attitudes. Why should we investigate the students' reading attitudes? I reiterate this point because of these matters. Number one, in several studies across the globe, especially in the US, there was a trend that is observed about the reading attitudes of students. So the trend goes like this, that as the students get older, as they advance to the next level, their reading attitudes deteriorate or worsen. Okay? Next, reality check, there is lack of reading attitude studies in the Philippines. In the US and in different parts of the world, there are large scale, national scale, and even mega scale studies concerning the reading attitudes of the students. So that really shows us how they consider and how they recognize reading attitudes as a fundamental aspect of literacy. In the Philippines, we also need to do that. And we realize that there are implications for distance learning in this time of pandemic. Um, as for my students, they transitioned from face-to-face to online distance learning. And what happened there is from their reading of print text in the face-to-face context, they drastically and they totally and abruptly transitioned to reading of digital texts. Okay, so that is one of the reasons why I looked into the reading attitudes of my senior high school students. Well, for those students who are in the modular distance learning setup, uh, there are digital modules, and for those who are reading print modules, um, what stays the same is the fact that they need to read amply. Okay? All the more now that they have their SLMs or their self-learning modules, that necessitates ample reading. And so we should make sure that the reading attitudes of our students are monitored, are measured, and if we find out that it is negative, that there is a problem with their reading attitudes, then we must do something. We must step in. We're already done with the what, with the why, with the how, and we even went back and reiterated why we should investigate the reading attitudes of the students. Now, this part is the so what. So what if we've already identified, if we've already measured the reading attitudes of the students? Well, it's good if we found that our students' reading attitudes are positive. This means that we just need to sustain that positive reading attitudes. But what if we find out that they have negative reading attitudes? Then that's the time that we need to employ different strategies, different techniques, and different procedures to improve the reading attitudes of our students. First, we should inculcate to our parents and guardians that it starts with home literacy. So we should remind them that as parents and guardians and as the MKOs or the more knowledgeable others at home, they should be the ones who are modeling to the students how to read and how to enjoy reading. Okay? Again, it starts at home. And we realize now in the time of the new normal education, now that they are at home, day in, day out, in the distance learning setup, we see how home literacy is magnified. Next is we teachers should model and demonstrate reading. We can do this by employing specific paradigms, one of which is the explicit teaching of reading. So we start with modeling to them how to read, then we give them guided activities, and eventually we will allow them to be independent learners. In this case, independent readers, after giving the sufficient modeling and guided practice activities. We can also make use of close reading. And in this strategy, there may even be a need to go to each line of the text, okay, and to point out specific words, specific details to ensure that they really understand the information conveyed in the text. And we also need to provide systematic reinforcement. Reinforcement, the simplest way of doing it is through giving praises. And when do we give praises? Whenever we see progress in their reading pursuit, in their reading activity. There are a couple of things that we can provide, one of which is a variety of reading materials. This means that we provide both print and digital reading materials. In the public school, we have this LRMDS, or the Learning Resource Management and Development System. We should maximize this in organizing our repository for print and digital learning materials. We can also provide not just a variety of reading materials, but of high interest reading materials. This means that our provision of reading materials, or the reading materials that we give to our students, are based on their interests. Okay, so we should start by surveying the reading interests of our students. Okay, and in line with this is the facilitation of independent reading activities. These are old but gold. These are classic ones. We have the sustained silent reading, or the SSR. We also have the drop everything and read, or the DEAR. Okay, so in these activities, we allow them to choose their own materials, and this fosters independent reading. This develops recreational reading as well. There are also things which we should do in a very outright manner. We should make the students aware of the fundamental purpose of reading, and that is to get information. We should always remind them that reading is not just about decoding, but comprehending the content and getting the information through the reading material. Lastly, we should make the students realize that their success in reading can be attributed to their efforts. The more that they are exerting effort, the greater effort that they give, the more successful they can be in their reading activity. The bottom line of our episode. As we look into the reading attitudes of our students, we recognize that they are 21st century learners who read for different purposes and through different mediums. If they have positive reading attitudes, well and good, let us sustain it. But if they have negative reading attitudes, then there are a couple of things that we can do to improve it. The students' positive reading attitudes is of importance because it fosters lifelong reading and learning. Thank you so much for joining me in this PNU Talks episode. I-comment ang inyong mga katanungan at mga kuro-kuro tungkol sa ating episode ngayong araw. Huwag kalimutang i-like at i-share ang episode na ito. Muli, ako si Teacher Kevin at sumainyo ang PNU Talks.